Previously on Magoosh Medrek.
Magoosh, if you don't come down this...
You'll do what exactly?
The master did not tell you to let go of his leg, human.
Tisk, Scotia.
Silence, both of you!
I'm sorry, I can't come down at the moment. I've ordered paprika handle and it will be ready any minute now.
I will rip this into pieces one board at a time.
Alistair, go to hell.
Bother.
1897. The golden age of Europe. Her capital cities twinkle as industry has paved the way to wealth, and science shines the light of reason on ignorance and superstition. But in the darker corners of the old world dwell ancient things that do not submit to modern sensibilities. One man keeps the darkness from overtaking the light. His name, Magoosh Medrek, Vampire Hunter. And as Magoosh was speeding towards a similar fate to that of poor Otosh Medrek, still languishing behind the door and concussed out of his gourd, a local farmer who was deep in inebriation chose that exact instant to open said door. The farmer in question was named Igor Kozyolovich, a local of some notoriety for having previously run a disastrous protection scam, whereby he would offer insurance against gopher infestation to other farmers, and then secretly let gophers loose in their fields if they refused to pay him. This ill-conceived flim-flam had ended in one black eye and a considerable blow to his ego. This backstory is not particularly relevant to the current proceedings, but I include it here to avoid being accused of shirking my authorly duties regarding world building, so consider this world just a little richer. Anyway, by opening the door to the inn, Igor had set his latest scheme into motion, the plan being to make a braggadocious show of not being afraid of vampires and stepping out into the night to yell at the demons that lurked there, while being sure to stay well within the flickering safety of the lit torch outside. He would let loose with a string of profanities that had taken him a week to come up with, and then return to a hero's welcome and free drinks. The goal of this swaggering show was to impress the other patrons, inspiring confidence and admiration, at least enough to repair the damage done by his failed gopher con, while secretly hoping that word of his bravery would make it back to his neighbor's beautiful and rather buxom 19-year-old daughter, Mina. Upon opening the door, however, Igor's night took an unexpected turn, as all of the air in his lungs was forcefully driven out of him by Magoosh's feet assaulting his chest at high velocity, knocking him back into the common room as the vampire hunter bulldozed his way inside. Igor smashed into the back wall and was immediately knocked unconscious, a sack of live gophers spilling out of his jerkin as he fell to the ground. Due partially to the impact and partially to the miraculous elasticity of his suspenders, Magoosh's speed dwindled quickly as he flew further into the inn, slowing him down enough to pick out individual details on the peasants' faces, all staring at him in disbelief. A mole here, a crooked nose that had healed badly from a break there, glazed eyes filmed with ale and hard toil in a harsh land, and for a moment Magoosh was overwhelmed with the smell of unwashed humanity. Then his suspenders snapped back again with a twang, and he was ripped backwards out of the doorway. Without a word or complaint, Frosya Ivanova slammed the door behind him. As Igor opened the door on his unwelcome surprise, Lord Maximilian de Noapte staggered about, calling out in a reverberating snarl of rage,
Scorcher, kill!
The vampire lord was feeling both embarrassed at his momentary incapacity, wiping at his eyes, and suddenly nervous at his possible vulnerability. After all, Magoosh Medrek had ended the lives of several of his contemporaries and was not a force to be underestimated. His brilliant tactical gambit, which had claimed Alistair, was evidence enough of that. At his call, Scortia reached down and picked up the infrared coagulator, smiling with malevolence and not so secretly relishing the fact that Alistair was no more. She flicked on the coagulator and tensed her lithe body to tear Magoosh apart. But a heartbeat before she launched herself into the air, fantasies of ramming Magoosh's puny weapon down his throat dancing in her mind's eye, Maximilian staggered into her, causing her to lose her balance. Scortia stepped back, tripped, and then began to fall. It was one small step under which any other circumstances would have been inconsequential, but on this day, the ground was slick with the remnants of the vampire formerly known as Alistair, and Scortia's one small step could not find purchase. She slipped in the blood, and her feet came out from under her as she fell backwards, an expression of sick surprise dawning on her face. As she fell to the ground, her arms came up in an involuntary motion of warding, trying to right herself, and the infrared coagulator soared into the air. Scortia Vladimirovna, who had terrorized the peasantry of Eastern Europe since the time of Ivan the Terrible, came crashing down on the broken moose's head, its antler neatly entering her upper back, barely missing her spine, and erupting through her chest, staking her through her fragile heart. Scortia, eyes wide in disbelief, screamed a guttural jaguar shriek that held within it all the fury of a predatory animal that had been denied its prey in the last moment. Blood exploded from her chest, and she vomited a geyser of crimson liquid which rode upon the snow beneath her, an epilogue in red. As the cold light faded from her eyes, it was replaced by the still glaze of death, and in that moment Scortia looked almost scared, a little girl treading water before a maelstrom, caught in its deadly pull. Her body deflated, shriveling and shrinking until she was nothing more than a dusty husk, which, as if in mocking salute, the wind caught and tugged at her, turning her into a sad flag that whipped about on the moose's antler that had impaled her. As Scortia died, Igor Kozyolovich was having his thorax traumatized by Magoosh's size 12s, and while those two events were happening, Maximilian finally managed to clear his eyes. He inhaled deeply and looked at the ground, focusing on regaining his equilibrium. Lamentably for him, however, he found himself bent over Scortia in her death throes, just in time to be blasted in the face by the fountain of gore that erupted from her throat. He roared and went staggering about again, this time not sure if he was seeing red from the blood or the burning wrath that enveloped him. That was when he heard the twang of Magoosh's suspenders propelling him out of the inn at high speed. Maximilian went instantly still as a murderous coldness dropped over him, and he calmly wiped away the dead blood from his face. Magoosh Medrek had killed many vampires in his day, but curiously he didn't really remember any of them. When the crucial moment arrived, he always kind of closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the vampire was dead and he wasn't. This was not something about which he was arrogant, or at least not that arrogant, nor was it a fact that he dwelled upon. It was just how things were. He merely assumed that his instinct was strong enough to prevail over evil every time. So as he now found himself hurtling towards Maximilian, whose eyes blazed hellfire and promised murder most foul, he squeezed his own eyes shut. Maximilian saw Magoosh flying towards him and drew a deep breath, savoring the anticipation of an imminent kill. That breath cleared his head and provoked a vision, his long, long life flashing before his eyes in rapid succession in sepia tableau. He saw scenes of massacre and pain, of torture and lust, of delicious screams and bloody orgies, all colored with that insatiable hunger. And then, quite unexpectedly, from a deep wellspring which he had thought buried long ago, a secret yet profound loneliness emerged within him, panging his heart and reminding him of his life before being Lord Maximilien de Noapte, of his real life, his human life when a living heart pumped within his chest and guided his conscience, a life when he was just Maxie. He blinked, and he saw a quaint cottage on the edge of a wood, standing by a pristine mountain lake. He remembered the warm scent of long summer afternoons, the flavor of ripe strawberries picked in the rolling fields, the laughter of his dear siblings, long since gone to dust in their graves, and the glorious memory of his last sunset, seen from across his beloved lake, the water smooth as glass and on cold fire with the majesty of the sky above, reflecting a billion hues of red and gold, orange and purple. The force of this visual memory filled his heart and stopped his breath, his elation being tainted by quiet regret and longing. With a loud crack, Magoosh's suspenders once again reached their maximum stretchability, this time snapping violently, the instant recoil acting upon Magoosh's mass as he was in flight. But as inertia is a demanding mistress, the suspenders did not arrest his forward momentum completely, but rather sent him into a flailing spin. Time seemed to both slow down and speed up, and Magoosh cartwheeled into Maximilien. The pair went tumbling to the snow, a whirlwind of snarling and yelling, up becoming down, left becoming right, human and vampire blurring into an out-of-control carousel of centripetal force and motion sickness. As they hit the ground, the vampire sank his fangs into something soft and yielding which appeared before his face. But instead of a jet of hot blood filling his mouth and nose with its delectable copper taste, Maximilien tasted dirt and found that he had gorged himself on a boot in place of a jugular, his deadly fangs just barely missing the foot inside, no doubt, instead lodging in the thick heel where they stuck fast. The momentum carried them forward, and they rolled and skidded for a moment, airborne, earthborne, and topsy-turvy. Then they landed in the snow, hard, Maximilien on his back, Magoosh's foot attached to his lips, Magoosh on top of him in a seated position, eyes still squeezed shut. As Maximilien frantically tried to free his fangs from Magoosh's boot heel, he noticed movement from above and awkwardly looked up, just in time to receive a blazing infrared coagulator in the eye socket. Sent skyward by Scorch's fatal fall, it had hung in the night air, surveying the slumbering countryside, and then descended back to earth, sliding home like Excalibur being sheathed back into the stone whence Arthur Eld pulled it all those years ago. Maximilien's death knell ripped through the night, and his face immediately started to boil and melt, flesh falling off his cheekbones and jaw in a cascade of steaming blood and howling agony. The same chain reaction that had taken Alistair tore through Maximilien's body, sublimating flesh to burning vapor in the space of a few heartbeats, internal steam pressure building to a crescendo as the soon-to-be late vampire lord writhed and bucked. Then, with a concussive blast, as had happened before to his younger protege, Maximilien exploded, sending a 360-degree shockwave of cooked plasma and stinking coagulated blood splattering against the exterior of the inn and all over the nighttime road and snow. Seated in the center of this grisly scene, almost deaf from the vampiric explosion, like a clueless somnambulist awakening to find themselves in an abattoir, Magoosh Medrek opened his eyes and looked around thoughtfully.
It was a scene he was well familiar with. To his left lay the remnants of Maximilien's blasted head, a study in black and crimson with obscene protrusions of white here and there as the skull shone through.
The infrared coagulator lay buried to the hilt in one of the now vacant eye sockets, still burning brightly, its tip sending little beams of reddish light dancing out of the nose and eyes and ears of the burst cranium in a gruesome facsimile of a jack-o'-lantern. A Maximilia lantern, if you will. Magoosh reached down and withdrew his trusty coagulator, shielding his eyes as he did. He clicked it off and brought it to his lips, kissing it lightly, and then grimaced, making small spitting sounds as he realized what he had just done. He slowly stood up, covered in blood, but smiling in the cold air nonetheless. He inhaled deeply and let out an audible breath.
Yeah! That's what I'm talking about, yeah! Oh, look at me, I'm a big scary vampire.
Magoosh yelled.
You always did talk too much, you großer nuisance vampire!
Then, with all the bravado of a 13-year-old show-off who had just won a dare, Magoosh sprang to his feet and started to gesticulate in time to some unheard music, taunting the smoking pile of vampire remains on the bloody snow. As Magoosh Medrek danced in celebration, close by, poor Otosh Medrek sat up with a groan, clutching his head, a horrible dream still lurking in the peripheries of his consciousness. As his vision began to clear, he started to become aware of his surroundings and was surprised that he was not in his bed, but on the cold ground beside the door to the local inn. He wiped his hand across his face and was confused to find that he was also covered in blood. Not alarmed, just confused. His head hurt. As he turned his face to the gyrating vampire hunter who was now making obscene gestures with what looked like a rib cage, Otosh Medrek slowly got to his feet. As if on cue, the door flew open and smashed Otosh Medrek in the face, with all the comedic timing of a tongue-in-cheek, slapstick short story. Otosh Medrek slid to the ground, returning to dreamland, as Frosya Ivanova pattered across the snow to Magoosh Medrek. She touched his shoulder and he jumped in surprise, letting out a cry.
Gott in Himmel, Schatzi, you've almost made me pee my pants!
Frosya Ivanova shrugged her shoulders lethargically.
Ваша курица готова, господин Медрек.
She said evenly.
What?
Magoosh yelled, ears still ringing.
I can't hear you! The goddamned vampire detonated right next to my head! Speak louder!
Frosya Ivanova shrugged her shoulders lethargically again.
Ваша курица готова, господин Медрек.
She repeated in the same subdued tone.
My pepperke Händel!
Magoosh Medrek crowed and tossed the rib cage aside, which he had been defiling.
Los geht's!
Magoosh turned and sprinted back towards the inn, its door standing open, offering warmth and tasty chicken and drink. Frosya Ivanova followed at a more measured pace. Magoosh waiting impatiently for her, jumping up and down, muttering,
Come on, come on, come on, pepperke Händel!
She crossed the threshold, and he slammed the door behind him, plunging the road into darkness. A moment later, Frosya Ivanova opened the door again, light lancing across the charnel scene without, and stepped outside. She covered poor Otosh Medrek with a blanket, and then wordlessly closed the door again, dark descending to hold court. The night was quiet and chill. The stars looked down indifferently from their orbits, and the world continued to turn, now with 3 fewer vampires than when the sun had set, thanks to the one and only Magoosh Medrek, Vampire Hunter. And thus closes the first chapter of...
Gott in Himmel, what are you telling me here? That was only the first chapter? There's more?
Oh, yes, but before we get into that...
Yeah, we know. I was conceived, written, performed, and produced by you, Sasha Mereu. Music is by Danny Tuggle and additional sound effects by Zepsplat and Pixabay.com. Additional voices were provided by Ava D'arcy and Maggie. Did I miss anything?
Not bad, Magoosh. However, additional piano music for that flashback scene was by Samuel Backof and is used by permission. Also, a special thanks goes out to Jordan, Alex, Frankie, Dory, and Kristen.
Yeah, that's nice. Okay, let's get down to the important stuff. Me. Is there a season 2 coming?
Yes, Magoosh, there is.
I knew it! That's the most exciting news ever! What's it about? Ghosts? Werewolves? Zombies?
Well...
Demons? Skeletons walking around and poking people with their ribs? More vampires?
Not exactly.
Mimes?
Mimes?
Yeah, mimes. I just think they're cool.
I guess you're just going to have to stay tuned to find out what happens in Season 2 to the one, the only...
Oh, I know! It's about a giant squid that flies around and murders
How do you even know about giant squid? Not a lot of those being talked about in Transylvania in 1887.
Ah, come now. Everybody knows it's a giant squid was first catalogued by Western Science in 1873. I was there. I heard the lecture.
I stand corrected. Well, come on.
Hey, I'm not done yet. Turn the music back on.
No can do, Magoosh. The season is over.
Oh, well, that's too bad. You never answered my question. What the hell is that? What? Where? Now tell me, what's season 2 about?
Okay, you really want to know?
Yeah, Schatzi, yeah.
You really want me to tell you what Season 2 is about?
You know I do. What, are you gonna make me beg?
Okay, but don't go telling everyone and ruining the surprise. Season 2 is all about...
Touché. Well played.
Don't feel too bad, Magoosh. Would you like to go get some consolation cheese?
Gouda?
Sure.
Los geht's!
Season 2 is
coming!